brief to the U.S. Supreme Court regarding a similar patent infringement case to be heard in October. He preyed upon the Supreme Court to uphold these new plant patents to protect the corporations that own the patents. Upon learning this, I also learned that Mr. Ashcroft had received the largest campaign contribution that Monsanto gave any 2000 political candidate in his failed bid for Senate re-election.
Deregulate, which is basically telling from the executive branch everybody to look the other way.
Companies now do testing themselves and report their findings to the government. The process is voluntary.
If we started really asking the right questions, we would stop this technology for the next 50 or 100 years.
But just the opposite has happened. In the US alone, genetically modified canola, corn, cotton, and soybeans, which were non-existent in the 1980s, were grown on 3.7 million acres in 1996. That jumped to 100 million acres in 2003. In 1998, Mexico banned the planting of genetically engineered corn to protect their agricultural heritage.
In Mexico, there are literally hundreds of varieties of corn. Some of them are adapted to very wet climates, some to very dry climates. Some of them are resistant to certain specific pests. Some of them have different tastes. Some of them are good for doing popcorn that was invented by the Aztecs. Some varieties are good to make tortillas or to feed the cattle. There's a whole bunch of kinds of corn in Mexico.
Around 7,000 years ago, the people who lived in Mexico started domesticating maize, or corn, and an intimate relationship developed between humans and the plant. Corn is not only their food supply, it is also part of the culture.
In the mountains in Jalisco, the farmers plant on purpose their cornfields near areas where the wild corn grows, the teocintle. And the reason why they do that is because they know perfectly well that they get resistance to pests transferred from the wild strain into the cultivated strain.
We don't know which parts of that diversity are going to be useful, and we need to preserve them all. Now, most of the diversity for crops is contained within so-called land races. These are the plants that small farmers, generally in very diverse areas of the world, maintain in very small plots with selection for the very specific conditions of the plots, which might be certain altitude, frost, or drought, or very specific conditions. That is really the basis of diversity that we are continuously tapping from to maintain our commercial production of crops, to feed the world, basically.
The 1970 corn blight in the United States destroyed millions of acres of corn. The U.S. was lucky to find a strain of landrace corn originally from Mexico that could resist the blight. In the year 2000, Dr. Chapela discovered genetically modified corn growing in this remote area. The campesino farmers had bought kernels of unlabeled American GM corn from their local government store to eat. And as farmers have done for thousands of years, they ate some and planted some.
Farmers make no difference between seed and grain for the obvious reason that grains are seeds and are viable seeds. They have a little embryo. They have the little baby inside the seed, and if you put it in the ground, it will germinate.
The genetically modified seed crossed with the landrace corn, and contamination entered the gene line of this ancient grain.
ese maíz se come, se está vendiendo a toda la población y en todo México, supongo.
Porque no saben en realidad qué
No,
consecuencias
pues
puede tener.
es un maíz para consumo humano. Entonces, ¿cómo va a ser malo, no?
It is cheaper for Mexicans to buy imported corn from the United States than it is to grow it themselves. This is because American corn is subsidized by the taxpayers, whereas Mexican corn is not subsidized. Nevertheless, many Mexicans prefer to grow their native corn varieties.
¿Por qué usted está tan necio de estar plantando la misma semilla todos los años? ¿Por no comprar?
Bueno, nosotros lo tomamos como un ahorro, porque también a veces, digamos, falta de económico, pues no tenemos que correr a la Conasur para comprarlo. ¿no? Sin embargo, estamos comiendo, según nosotros estamos comiendo lo mejor, ¿no? Porque es un maíz que es...
Todo eso.
Sí.
Es que el trabajo que ustedes hacen aquí es un trabajo que reditúa, pero para el mundo.
Sí.
The farmers said, if we do have transgenic elements in our corn, is it going to be like our colleague in Canada? Will the multinational companies come and demand payment for the presence of the gene?
In November 2001, Dr. Chapela published a peer-reviewed paper in the science journal Nature revealing the GMO contamination.
We took this very seriously from the beginning, and we have been doing studies and collecting samples and sending them around, trying first to duplicate Ignacio Chapela's results, which we did, and now going a step further and identify this problem.
This is an issue that is a bit contentious because we didn't want to in any way jeopardize our genetic heritage. The first thing is we didn't want that to happen. Whether that is going to have other consequences, well, that's a matter of debate. The fact is, those sequences were not supposed to be in those corns, and they are now. And that's a big problem for us.
What happens when you introduce into these areas a single genotype, the one industrial crop, that preferentially passes its genes into the progeny? What happens is basically you crowd out that diversity. And this in the long term is a major threat to food security. Not only for those people who live there, but also for us, also for our industrial production of food. If we do not have access to those genetic resources, we're going to be facing challenges that we are not going to be able to solve.
It is not just genetically modified corn that has raised patenting issues in Mexico.
Current international system of patents does not protect in any way traditional knowledge, and we have had a number of problems in Mexico related to that. I think there are 3 or 4 applications for patents for tortillas. Like it was a new thing, like somebody had invented tortillas, which of course have existed for 3,000, 5,000 years, we don't know. First of all, some people will debate, and I think it is a worthwhile debate, if life should be patented at all. And that's a discussion that humanity as a species hasn't done properly. And it is a sort of pending homework, something we need to do.
By the year 2003, the U.S. had sold millions of pounds of GMO corn to Mexico for less than the cost of growing it. Around the world, resistance was mounting against the U.S. exported genetically modified crops. The loss of corn exports to Europe is worth around $300 million a year.